We live in interesting times.
For the headlines.
A U.S. House of Representatives passed a $4.5 billion emergency border aid package to care for thousands of migrant families and unaccompanied children detained after crossing the U.S.-Mexico border.
Searing photographs showing a man and his 23-month-old daughter lying face down in shallow water along the Mexico bank of the Rio Grande near the U.S. border highlights the perils of the latest migration crisis involving mostly Central Americans fleeing violence and poverty.
And a heat wave is about to hit mainland Europe with temperatures up to 40 degrees Celsius expected this week. And most at risk are older people with pre-existing health problems. And the only solution is to drink, according to one doctor in German capital Berlin.
Our ABC correspondent Greg Bessa meets Hutt City Mayor Ray Wallace, who talks about its culture and the Filipino community there.
I'm Alma Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.
We welcome our viewers here in the Philippines and around the world. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Cepeda.
And now to the news. Searing photographs showing a man and his 23-month-old daughter lying face down in shallow water along the Mexico bank of the Rio Grande near the U.S. border highlighted the perils of the latest migration crisis involving mostly Central Americans fleeing violence and poverty. And we want to warn you on the images that you're about to see. The man's black shirt was hiked up his chest with the girl's head tucked inside and her arm draped loosed around his neck, suggesting she clung to him in her final moments. Their bodies were found in shallow water along the Matamoros, the Mexico bank of the Rio Grande, across from Brownsville in the U.S. state of Texas. And the searing photograph captured by journalist Julia Leduc and published by Mexican newspaper La Jornada highlighted the perils of the latest migration crisis involving mostly Central Americans fleeing violence and poverty and hoping for asylum in the U.S. And there have been a number of other recent grim discoveries near the border, such as 2 babies, a toddler, and a woman who were found dead, overcome by the sweltering heat. Family members of Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez and his daughter Valeria mourned their loss after being told that the two had been found face down in shallow water along the bank of the Rio Grande. Take a look.
Su muñeco preferido es. Este monito, cada vez que su mamá la listaba.
Sí, es.
El último mensaje que me mandó el sábado me puso de que mamá, te amo, me puso. Cuídense, nosotros aquí estamos bien. Yo cuando leí ese mensaje, no sé, a mí me dieron ganas de llorar porque yo lo sentí como que si fue una despedida.
According to Leduc's reporting for La Jornada, Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez, frustrated because the family was unable to have an opportunity to present themselves to U.S. authorities and request asylum, swam across the river with the daughter Valeria. He set her on the U.S. bank and started back for his wife Vanessa Avalos, but seeing him move away, the girl threw himself into the waters. Martinez returned and was able to grab Valeria, but the current swept them both away. Their bodies were discovered Monday morning, several hundred yards from where they had tried to cross and about a half mile from an international bridge.
A 2-year-old boy locked in detention wants to be held all the time. A few girls ages 10 to 15 say they've been doing their best to feed and soothe the clingy toddler who was handed to them by a guard days ago. Lawyers warn that kids are taking care of kids and there's inadequate food, water, and sanitation for the 250 infants, children, and teens at the Border Patrol station. The bleak portrait emerged on Thursday after a legal team interviewed 60 children at the facility near El Paso that has become the latest place where attorneys say young migrants are describing neglect and mistreating at the hands of the U.S. government.
We've seen the worst conditions that we've seen in the last 3 years of conducting these visits. That in the last week at Ursula and this week at the Clint border facility, we are seeing sick children, we are seeing dirty children, we are seeing hungry children, we're seeing children who have been separated from their parents and other family members, children who within the facility are being separated from their siblings, which they need to be with their siblings right now. We are seeing dirty clothes on them, many of them have not been bathed, many of them talk about how hungry they are. These children have been falling asleep, some of them during the interviews with us. They have also talked about how dizzy they are, the headaches that they have.
Many children interviewed had arrived alone at the U.S.-Mexico border, but some had been separated from their parents or other adult caregivers, including aunts and uncles, the attorney said.
Our children are telling us that there have been over 300 children in a single room. If that's true, which it appears to be, then literally the United States is warehousing children in a Lord of the Flies scenario, and we've got to do something about it.
Meanwhile, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a $4.5 billion emergency border aid package to care for the thousands of migrant families and unaccompanied children detained after crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. The bill passed along party lines after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi quelled a mini revolt by progressives and Hispanic lawmakers who sought significant changes to the legislation.
Today we found out that the administration is sending children back to a station in Clint, Texas, from where just days earlier those children had been removed after enduring weeks without a shower or change of clothes. When visiting these children, one lawyer reported the children are locked in their cells. They said they can't bring themselves to play because they are trying to stay alive in there. And yet last week, the Trump Department of Justice argued in court that the government should not have to provide children in custody with soap, toothbrushes, or beds. This situation is child abuse. It is an atrocity that violates every value we have, not only as Americans, but as moral beings.
The bill contains more than $1 billion to shelter and feed migrants detained by the Border Patrol and almost $3 billion to care for unaccompanied migrant children who are turned over the Department of Health and Human Services. It seeks to mandate improved standards of care at HHS influx shelters that house children waiting to be placed with sponsors such as family members in the U.S. Both House and Senate bills ensure funding could not be shifted to Trump's border wall and would block information on sponsors of immigrant children from being used to deport them. President Trump would be denied additional funding for immigration and customs enforcement detention beds. The White House has threatened to veto the House bill, saying it would hamstring the administration's border security efforts, and the Senate's top Republican suggested that the House should simply accept the Senate measure, which received only a single nay vote during a committee vote last week.
20, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes.
U.S. President Donald Trump is blaming Democrats for not being willing to listen or to sign any bills to handle a humanitarian crisis at the southern border. The Trump administration has faced a barrage of criticism in recent days over conditions inside the Border Patrol facility in Clint, Texas.
Yes, I am. I'm very concerned. And they're much better than they were under President Obama, by far. And we're trying to get the Democrats to agree to really give us some humanitarian aid, humanitarian money. And that is a very fair question. and I appreciate that question. But I'm very concerned. It's in much better shape than it ever was. A lot of these young children come from places that you don't even want to know about, the way they've lived, the way they've been, the poverty that they grew up in. But with that, if we can get this bill signed, we'll be able to do it.
In other news, Hong Kong activists opposed to contentious extradition legislation called on leaders of the U.S., the European Union, and others to raise the issue with Chinese President Xi Jinping at this week's G20 summit in Japan. Beijing has strongly opposed such a development, saying Hong Kong matters are strictly an internal Chinese affair. Protest groups gathered in central Hong Kong in the morning and marched to 19 foreign consulates to present a petition letter urging the international community to put pressure on China at the G20. Activists held up placards attacking the legislation, and they chanted slogans including "Free Hong Kong." Opponents say changes to the Chinese territories legislation could expose citizens of all nationalities to being extradited to China for unfair trials and possible torture, reducing Hong Kong's judicial independence and the civil liberties it retained after the handover from British rule in 1997.
Basically, because I think that Hong Kong is an international city, which the extradition bill to China will affect the benefits of different countries. That's why this is necessary for the other countries or overseas people to pay attention to this extradition bill.
This is actually a 19 council marathon. So we've just been to the US and the EU and now the UK. And then we'll go to a lot more councils. We're doing this because it's right before the G20 summit, and that this could help us, in a way, promote our international voices.
And the news continues here on Eagle News International. We'll be right back.
It is getting hot in Europe. This week, hot winds from the Sahara Desert are expected to turn the temperature up to 40 degrees Celsius. In France, authorities in the Paris region have issued an orange alert, the second highest level, to warn people about the intense heat. In Germany, the record temperature for June is expected to be smashed this week. It might even be hotter than the hottest recorded day ever, the 38.2 degrees measured in Frankfurt in 1947. Hospitals are preparing for an influx of people struggling with the heat.
Es ist, wie gesagt, zwei verschiedene Bevölkerungsgruppen, die Probleme mit der Hitze haben. Es sind einmal die Kinder. Da geht ja die Empfehlung dahingehend, dass Kinder bis zum 2. Lebensjahr gar nicht in die Sonne sollen, wobei es da jetzt eher um die Haut geht. Hautkrebs, Risiko im Leben wird dann natürlich deutlich erhöht. Und es sind vor allem die älteren Patienten, die dann vorerkrankt sind, Probleme mit den Nieren, Probleme im Wasserhaushalt und Probleme mit dem Herzen, die natürlich bei heißer Witterung, bei wenig Trinken, Sonneneinstrahlung große Probleme kriegen, sodass bestehende Probleme schlimmer werden können und es natürlich zu Schwindel, Übelkeit kommt, was zu Stürzen führt. Und dann kommen sie leider zu uns in die Unfallchirurgie, entweder hier in die Rettungsstelle oder manchmal dann leider auch zu uns auf den OP-Tisch.
In 2003, a heat wave in Europe resulted in around 15,000 deaths in France alone. There are a few things people can do to minimize the health risks, according to TRAC. The most important is to stay out of the sun. And the second important thing is to stay hydrated.
Trinken, trinken, trinken. Man soll wissen, insbesondere ältere Leute, sollten sie jetzt keine schlimme Herzerkrankung oder schlimme Nierenerkrankung haben, ist es sehr wichtig, doch deutlich ausreichend zu trinken. Weil gerade wenig trinken, niedriger Blutdruck, Schwindel, Sturz. Ach so, das kommt zum
In Japan, a country where cleanliness and neat packaging have long been considered good service, almost everything is sold plastic wrapped. But as world leaders gather in Osaka for the two-day G20 summit that starts on Friday, Japan will attempt to become a leader in environmental policy. At the same time, it plays catch-up with countries that already have well-defined goals in place. G20 nations produce half the world's plastic waste, and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who will chair the summit, has made fixing the problem a top initiative both at the summit and in Japan. Japan is the world's #2 consumer of single-use plastic packaging per person. The U.S. is #1 according to a 2018 UN Environment Program report. At a factory on Tokyo Bay, one of more than a dozen operated by plastic recycling company Kyoei Industry Company, about 35 tons of PET bottles are processed daily. They come in hundreds of bales, each wrapped in plastic, and are then unraveled, sorted, pulverized, heated, and minced. Next, they're turned into fine pellets and reborn as egg cartons, school uniforms, soccer jerseys, and other sports equipment, as well as PET bottles, returning to store shelves, according to company president Eiichi Furusawa.
したくてもですね、どこの国も輸入を、歓迎しないというような流れになりつつあるので、随分と減ってきていると思います。日本のプラスチックで約130万トンから、150万トンぐらい輸出されていたわけですけども、現在は多分100万トンを切ってきたぐらい徐々に輸出が今減ってるだろうというふうに思ってます。で我々はそれをさらに国内で上手に循環する方向に、進めたらいいと思ってますけど。
7-1 Holdings Company, the Japanese operator of 7-Eleven convenience stores, announced a plan last month to replace all plastic shopping bags with paper by 2030 and all plastic packaging with paper, biodegradable, or other reusable materials at its nearly 21,000 stores nationwide. And selected 7-Eleven stores near Tokyo, including one at Yokohama, have started offering paper bags instead of plastic.
現状2000年と比べまして2017年の数字になりますが、1店舗あたりのレジ袋の使用している重量については約6割まで下がっているという実態もあります。ただそこに加えてですね、昨今ではやっぱりこのプラスチックの問題というのが、出てきているところもあり、さまざまな方法をこれからも模索していく、そんな中の一つとして今回紙製の袋というのもちょっと使わせていただいております。
紙袋結構いいんじゃないですか。今ね、世界でもプラスチックナイロン、騒いでるじゃないですか。よろしくないと紙の方がいいんじゃないですか。
But plastic shopping bags and packaging are only a small part of the overall plastic waste problem, experts say. As much as 12.7 million tons of plastic waste end up in the ocean each year, of which up to 60,000 tons comes from Japan, according to a study cited by the country's Environment Ministry. Japan is also the world's #2 exporter of plastic waste. It used to export about 1.5 million tons per year, mainly to China. After China stopped accepting plastic imports in 2017, several Southeast Asian nations became new targets. But some countries, including Malaysia and the Philippines, are now turning the shipments back. And they accuse the rich countries of pushing their garbage onto poorer nations. Officials in Japan have scrambled to find a new home for the country's used plastic by establishing a 1.9 billion yen or $18 million emergency fund over the past 2 years, and asking local authorities and waste handlers to shoulder additional loads for recycling and incineration. Japan's plastic waste exports last year totaled 1 million tons, according to trade statistics, but experts say the decline could be linked to an increase in illegal exports or stockpiles at garbage dumps. Environment Ministry official Hiroshi Ono said Japan is working to build more recycling facilities, but added it takes some time.
And now we are trying very hard to further develop the internal and domestic plastic recycling facilities and recycling capabilities. But it takes some time. So when and which,
Dozens of climate activists held a protest outside the Japanese embassy in Manila on Wednesday, ahead of the Group of 20 summit on June 28-29 that will be held in Osaka. The protesters were calling on heads of state and governments, but in particular on Japan, to end the funding of coal and fossil fuel projects and to do more to fight climate change. While renewables account for 16% of Japan's energy supply, nuclear energy remained at just 3% in 2017 compared to the target of 20% to 22%, according to an energy white paper adopted by the cabinet earlier this month.
G20 is the group of the wealthiest nations on the planet, and they are going to talk, among other things, about climate. And we have to remind people that the G20 is actually responsible for a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions, the bulk of the greenhouse gas emissions that is causing climate change.
To other news now. On Wednesday, International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking, Myanmar authorities burned drugs worth an estimated $301 million in 3 different locations across the country. 109 million in Yangon, 42 million in Mandalay, and 150 million in Taugyi. This included 1,605 kilograms of opium, 824 kilograms of heroin, more than 108 million low-grade methamphetamine pills or yaba, 4,276 kilograms of crystal meth, and many precursor chemicals used to make methamphetamine. Drug experts believe Myanmar may now be the world's biggest meth producer, with jungle labs in ungovernable areas of Shan State, churning out untold tons of ice and hundreds of millions of meth pills, known regionally as yaba. Made in Myanmar, yaba is pouring west into Bangladesh and east into Laos, Thailand, and beyond in record amounts. High-grade crystal meth or ice is smuggled out of Myanmar via sophisticated networks to lucrative developed markets as far away as Japan, South Korea, and Australia. Myanmar's multi-billion-dollar drug industry is believed to outstrip rivals in Latin America, but with a low body count and publicity-shy kingpins, it rarely generates the same global headlines.
Global cocaine production reached an all-time high in 2017, breaking the previous year's record by 25%. The UN Drugs and Crime Agency said it is in its annual report as production soars in post-conflict Colombia. New remote fields and criminal gangs boosted production in the world's top supplier, despite efforts to steer rural communities away from coca cultivation following a peace deal with FARC rebels. The report said the jump in production was mainly driven by increases in cocaine manufacture in Colombia, which produced an estimated 70% of the world's cocaine. In the decade to 2017, there was a 50% increase in manufacture, reaching a record 1,976 tons 2 years ago, according to the report, which bases its figures on national monitoring systems. Over the same 10-year period, the amount of cocaine seized worldwide rose by 74%.
Malaysian authorities have arrested 4 Indians and seized more than 14 kilograms of drugs and over 5,000 turtles from their luggage at the Kuala Lumpur airport. Senior customs official Zulkarnain Mohammed Yusuf said agents found a total of 5,255 turtles kept in small baskets from the luggage of 2 Indian nationals who flew in from Guangzhou, China on June 30. Though Zulkarnain described the seized creatures as tortoises during a press conference Wednesday, the smuggled species is the red-ear slider turtle. He said the man told investigators the turtles, estimated to be worth $12,700 were meant to be sold as pets in India. Zulkarnain on Wednesday said officials also found a total of 14.34 kilograms of methamphetamine worth 717,000 ringgit or $174,000 hidden in special compartments in boxes that were hand-carried by 2 men who flew in from India on June 19 and June 20 respectively.
U.S. President Donald Trump said that at some point he and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will have a third meeting. Trump was speaking to reporters in the Oval Office, reiterating that both had exchanged letters recently.
Mention of another meeting?
Maybe there was, but we, at some point we'll do that. Getting along very well. He's not doing nuclear testing. When I took over, as you know, when I became president, they were testing. Previous to that, they were testing so much. They were doing ballistic tests and nuclear tests, and we didn't have our prisoners back. We had a whole lot of things that were going wrong. Now we have our hostages back, or prisoners back. They came back. We've had, as you know, the remains of the heroes, our great heroes from many years ago. That's coming back, and coming back as they find them and as they find the sites and the graves, they're sending them back. The relationship is a far different relationship than it was during the Obama years.
North Korean and U.S. officials are holding behind-the-scenes talks to arrange a third summit between President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on the fate of the North's expanding nuclear arsenal, South Korea's president said 4 months after a second meeting between the leaders in Vietnam collapsed without any agreement.
So we're going to have a very busy day tomorrow.
Our EBC correspondent Greg Bessa takes us to Lower Hutt, a city in the Wellington region of the North Island of New Zealand. And here he talks to Hutt City Mayor Ray Wallace and tells us about its culture and the fantastic things going on across the city. Greg?
Kia ora. Welcome to Lower Hutt. Lower Hutt, also known as Hutt City, is one of the cities in the Wellington region, New Zealand. It is the 7th largest city across the country. Based on June 2018 statistics, the city has an estimated population of 105,900, or barely more than 2% of the entire population of the country, including those people from various ethnic backgrounds.
How do you encourage cultural diversity in our city? What are the city programs and events that support people from different cultural backgrounds?
Well, Gregor, that's a very good question. I think I'm very lucky to be able to, I'm very proud of my Scottish heritage. I think that gives me an advantage in that I am in this country, born in another country, but now very proud to be here in New Zealand. And I think New Zealand has a very proud heritage and history of welcoming people from all cultures. So particularly here in Lower Hutt, which I'm proud to be the mayor of, we're probably one of the most diverse cities with cultures in New Zealand, and I think that's something we're very proud of. We encourage people to remember where they come from, be proud of their own culture, and ensure that culture is part of the life they see around them.
In terms of making the city more progressive and livable, can you cite some advantages of having a city of cultural diversity?
Well, I think cultural diversity adds to the vibrancy of the city, and that's why we're so lucky here in the Hutt. We have so many cultures, and that really does add to that vibrancy. And as you know, we have a number of events every year celebrating the many, many cultures, and that really just adds to that diversity, but adds to the excitement of the city. So I think it is a real plus having those different cultures.
Can you think of any disadvantage, Mr. Mayor?
Disadvantage, I think, like anything, there can sometimes be misunderstanding if you don't communicate and talk, and I think this is why we really promote our communities to come together as one, so that any differences can be talked through, worked through. It's no different from a family. Sometimes in a family you have differences of agreement, but because you've got that bond, you're able to work through any differences, and that's what makes Lower Hutt such an exciting place, because we do have that cultural diversity and people work together on projects. So I think that's something that's really great for our city in particular.
Yeah. Then, Mayor, as you are well aware of, one of the most active and participative cultural groups in our city is the Filipino community. It promotes different activities like entertainment, sports, and even some Filipino groups are conducting seminars for those newly arrived Filipino of theirs. So what can you say about the Filipino community in Lower Hutt?
Well, firstly, I can say that as a Lower Hutt resident, we are blessed to have such a strong Filipino community here. They're active in the community they see around them. They're in all parts of community life, which is great. But as an independent community as well, they're very strong. They have a caring nature. They want to help their fellow humans, and so that's something that I've been very impressed in, that when we've called to arms, that we've needed major events, we've needed help, there's been emergencies, anything of that nature, the Filipino community have rallied and they've been right there. Even our day-to-day sort of things, like when we have community cleanups and events, the Filipino community are one of the largest that turn out to help, and I think that's great. And our sporting events, and of course our cultural events, they're very strong with the culture. We celebrate Philly Fest. It's a really strong community, and we're blessed to have so many Filipinos, not only in Wellington, but the greater Wellington region as well.
And lastly, Mayor, do you have any message to all the cultural groups here in Lower Hutt?
That we are blessed to have you. What makes a rich community is a culturally diverse one. What I do say to people, though, like myself, don't forget where you come from. I'm very, very proud of my Scottish heritage, being born in Scotland, but I'm also now a very proud New Zealander. But I never forget where I come from, and I say that to all cultures, that we are enriched by them being here, by bringing their ways of doing things. And I would encourage people, never lose sight of where you come from and who you are.
It is beyond doubt that cultural diversity is a strength to Lower Hutt. And because cultural diversity grows constantly in various cities and towns in New Zealand, then it is an asset to this peace-loving, democratic, progressive, and people-centered country. From Hutt City Council, this is Greg Besa. I am one with Net 25.
Thank you, Greg. We'll be back with more news right after this break.
For Business News, this is Cesar Vallejos. Local businesses expressed confidence that their businesses thrived in the second quarter of the year given the improving economic dynamics of the country, but consumers' expectations of their financial situation indicate a less sanguine view of the period. In the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas quarterly survey of business and consumer sentiment, the country's Central Monetary Authority reported on Thursday that the outlook of firms on the economy improved for the second consecutive quarter in the April to June period this year. The BSP's Business Expectation Survey showed that local firms' confidence index in the second quarter rose to 40.5% from 35.2% for the first quarter of 2019. Local businesses attributed their more upbeat outlook to expectations of the following: usual uptick in demand during summer in view of the foreseen increase in the number of local and foreign tourists, enrollment and harvest periods, as well as the election-related spending in the run-up to the elections in May 2019. They also attributed the rosy view of the sustained increase in orders and projects leading to higher volume of production, the expansion of businesses and new product lines during the quarter, and the continued rollout of government infrastructure and development projects with the approval of the 2019 national budget. The BSP said that businesses were also optimistic that their business operations would benefit from the favorable macroeconomic conditions in the country, particularly the easing of inflation in 2019. The sentiment of businesses in the Philippines mirrored the more positive business outlook in Canada, France, Greece, Hungary, Israel, and South Korea. The broader buying public, however, does not seem very happy with the recent economic developments in the country. The BSP's Consumer Expectations Survey, meanwhile, showed a contrast from the optimism held by businessmen in the country as consumer outlook declined to a confidence index of negative 1.3% for the second quarter of the year from the 0.5% in the first quarter. Among the consumers' concerns that pulled down their confidence altogether are their expectations of higher prices of goods and household expenses. Concerns cited by consumers on poor health and high medical expenses, as well as water crisis, is also seen to have contributed to their pessimistic sentiment. Last quarter, both businesses and consumers felt an improvement in the country's economic conditions. Both local firms and consumers alike showed a marked improvement in their respective confidence index for the January to March period. The national government reported a budget surplus of 2.6 billion pesos for the month of May, reversing the budget deficit of 32.9 billion recorded in the same month in 2018 as revenues outpaced expenditures, data from the Bureau of Treasury showed. Broken down, revenues for the month amounted to 317.2 billion pesos, or an increase of 22.5% from the 259 billion recorded May last year, while expenditures of 314.7 billion represented an increase of 7.8% from the 291.9 billion level last year. It is the highest growth attained by the agency in the first 5 months of 2019, the BTR said. The Bureau of Customs also posted a 10.3% increase in its revenues for May at 58.2 billion pesos. Growth was propelled by higher dividends on shares of stocks, growing by 89.5% from May 2018 collections amounting to 30.8 billion. Revenue collections from other government agencies amounted to 16.1 billion pesos for the month, increasing by 50.4% from last year's 10.7 billion. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo held meetings in India's capital on Wednesday amid growing tensions over trade and tariffs that has strained the partners' ties. Pompeo called on India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Wednesday morning and later was meeting his counterpart Subramaniam Jaishankar. In a joint news conference, Pompeo and Jaishankar both downplayed disagreements over trade.
On trade and investments, the U.S. is today our largest trade partner. It's among our key investment sources as well. And what has been clear in the last few years is that as both economies have grown strongly, new opportunities have been created by new demands, and we were both very optimistic about where our economic relationship is going and can go. On some outstanding issues, particularly relating to trade, my urging was that we take a constructive and pragmatic view of that. It is natural when you have trade that there will be trade issues.
Great friends are bound to have disagreements. The United States has been clear we seek greater market access and the removal of trade barriers in our economic relationship. And today I address these differences in the spirit of friendship, and I think that the two of us will be able to see a good outcome for each of our two countries. We didn't discuss the lifting of that. What we agreed we would do was we'd go work through the problem set. That we'd go, there are tariffs and counter tariffs, and we said we're going to do our best to make sure that all the right people get in all the right places and work through these problem sets so that we can get out of this and get on with the business of growing each of our two economies.
We have a certain perspective on Iran.
India imposed tariffs on 28 American products, including apples and almonds, on June 16 in retaliation for the U.S. ending India's preferential trade status on June 1. The Trump administration imposed higher duties on products including aluminum and steel. Former Hong Kong leader Donald Chang saw his misconduct conviction quashed by the city's top court on Wednesday, the final twist to one of the financial hub's most high-profile corruption cases. Chang was jailed in 2017 after being found guilty of failing to disclose his plans to lease a luxury flat from a major investor in a broadcaster, which was later granted a license from the government while he was leader. The 74-year-old, who held the leadership post of chief executive for 7 years from 2005, was the most senior city official ever to be convicted in a criminal trial and the highest-ranking one to be put behind bars. But on Wednesday, he was exonerated by the Court of Final Appeal, which quashed his misconduct in public office conviction, ending a 7-year legal ordeal. The unanimous decision overturned 2 lower court rulings, which found that his failure to make a declaration of interest over the flat deserved steep punishment because of the high office he held. The acquittal revolved around improper directions given by the trial judge to the jury over the misconduct charge, given jurors had cleared Chang of a more serious bribery offense. It is a major blow for the city's anti-corruption watchdog, which has long been accused by critics of being toothless and has now seen its most famous conviction collapse. Chang was Hong Kong's second leader after the 1997 handover to China and was regarded as something of a safe pair of hands who carefully steered the financial hub through the global economic meltdown caused by the 2008 crash. New Zealand's central bank left interest rates on hold Wednesday but signaled a cut was coming as it seeks to stimulate an economy flagging in the face of a global slowdown. The Reserve Bank of New Zealand, which trimmed its official cash rate, or OCR, to a record low of 1.5% last month, noted a number of central banks around the world were easing monetary policy to support demand. It said it decided against another reduction this month, but was closely monitoring the situation as data points to a weakening outlook for New Zealand's economy. Given the weaker global economic outlook and the risk of ongoing subdued domestic growth, a lower OCR may be needed over time to continue to meet our objectives, the bank said in a statement. Figures released this month showed growth at a sluggish 0.6% in the first 3 months of 2019, taking annual expansion to 2.7% for the year to March 31. Heading into the G20 summit, Facebook is on notice from powerful regulators, including the Fed chief, that its ambitious plans for a global cryptocurrency face piercing scrutiny. The Libra coin is endorsed by a heavyweight consortium of companies and could see Facebook leverage its 2 billion plus users to bring crypto money out of the shadows and into the mainstream. But Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, addressing the launch for the first time on Tuesday, added his considerable voice to warnings heard already from regulators in Europe and from U.S. lawmakers. We're looking at it very carefully, Powell told an event sponsored by the Foreign Council on Foreign Relations in Washington. He said, given the possible scale of it, I think that our expectations from a consumer's protection standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint, are going to be very, very high. Facebook promises the new currency launching next year will slash transaction costs and bring more services to people without access to the banking system. That's it for Business News. This is Cesar Vallejos. I'm one with 25. Eagle News International will be back. Stay with us.
The New Jersey Devils selected Jack Hughes with the #1 overall pick in the 2019 NHL Draft at the Rogers Arena in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada on Friday. Watch this.
Here at the 2019 NHL Draft at Rogers Arena in Vancouver, Canada, Jack Hughes from the U.S. Development Program went #1 overall to the New Jersey Devils, while Kaapo Kakko, the forward from Finland, went second to the New York Rangers, potentially igniting a new rivalry in the Big Apple. The New Jersey Devils held the #1 pick in this year's NHL Draft, and as expected, they went with the dynamic playmaker Jack Hughes. Highly regarded as the best skater in this year's class, the American forward who played for the U.S. Under-18 National Development Program is the 4th National Team Development Program alum to go #1 in the draft.
Yeah, it's it's a surreal feeling. It's unbelievable, everything you work for, man. I'm really just blessed to be around the people I am. I'm really thankful for the people who have gotten me where I am today. I think there's a lot of great players in the Devils, and it's a team that's right there, like I said. So I'm blessed to be a part of the organization. I'm really excited. I'm pretty confident. Obviously, Kaapo Kakko had a great year, so there's a lot of good players in this draft. But I was pretty confident, pretty calm, cool, collected throughout the whole process.
The second overall pick in this year's draft, the New York Rangers, selected the right winger Kaapo Kakko from the Finnish Elite League. The Rangers will be getting a playmaking forward, able to play both on the wing and at center. He scored 22 goals in 45 games in Finland's top pro league as an 18-year-old. Bowen Byram was a notable draftee. The high-scoring two-way defenseman from the city's junior team, Vancouver Giants, was selected 4th overall by the Colorado Avalanche. Byram led all defensemen in the Western Hockey League with 26 goals and was 3rd in points with 71. Bowen talks about what he needs to work on and thanks the fans in Vancouver for their continuous support in his hockey career.
I think I got to get bigger, stronger, faster. I got to shore up some details in my game, but the way I look at it, everyone's got to get better. Everyone's got to fix things. So, like I said, I got to work extremely hard and put myself in a good spot. I guess I want to thank them for supporting me here and throughout the year in the playoffs and the regular season. It was awesome. I'm really glad that we kind of went on a run for them like we did.
The host city for this year's NHL Draft was the Vancouver Canucks, who took Russian right winger Vasily Potslovan. Despite having a limited role with his club in Russia, he talked about his KHL experience and how playing against grown men and how he plans to improve.
Again, he hopes that these 2 years that he's going to play in Russia, he will get stronger and will be more a man. Vasily says that it was really good to have this experience to play against men, because they're stronger than this age group. So in this match it was really helpful.
The dream of being drafted and hearing their names called marks the beginning of these young players' careers. The journey starts here with the draft, as 31 franchises are hopeful they found the right pieces to win the ultimate goal of the Stanley Cup. From Rogers Arena in Vancouver, Canada, I'm Anthony Sevilla, 1 with 25.
Thank you, Anthony. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr. Also check out our boards on Pinterest and pictures on Instagram. I'm Sam Cepeda. Thanks for joining us.
And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles and
we're 1 with 25.